I really believe the Democrats want a shutdown to get off the subject of the tax cuts because they've worked so well. Nobody thought, including the Democrats, they could work this well.
Or the president talking about tax cuts that seem to be working the charm, but a government shutdown that seems to be, well, not. Because it is looking, the closer and closer we get to that late Friday night deadline, that the two sides are far apart. And whatever happens in the House doesn't necessarily guarantee anything at all happening in the United States Senate. Welcome, everybody. I'm Neil Cavuto, and you are looking at a confused political world where attention seems to be on another government shutdown that could be just, well, a day away. Peter Doocy in D.C. with the latest. Hey, Peter.
Neil, the House hasn't even voted yet, but over on the Senate side, lawmakers are starting to realize they don't have the votes. So now there are discussions underway about making the short-term budget resolution even shorter. There are talks about a bill that would fund the government for the next 5 days, and it is the brainchild of Kansas Senator Jerry Moran.
Senator Moran's proposal, I think Mike Lee liked it too, was that let's do a short-term CR, 4 or 5 days, with the understanding that gives us time to have a breakthrough on immigration, on defense spending, on chips, on disaster, and end this madness.
It's not clear right now how lawmakers who are concerned that a month-long budget would be unfair to the Pentagon are going to respond to an alternative that is just a quarter as long as that, 5 days. But that's where the discussions stand right now, because even though the White House Chief of Staff John Kelly and other administration officials descended on the Capitol again today to sit at the negotiating table, Democrats are following through on their threat to vote no on a short-term budget that doesn't come with protections for DACA recipients. That's even though Republicans attached 6 years worth of funding for the Children's Health Insurance Program to the resolution.
This is like giving you a bowl of doggy do, put a cherry on top and call it a chocolate sundae. This is nothing.
And if there's one thing that really strikes fear into the heart of lawmakers in Washington, D.C., it is the threat of having to work the weekend. But we just got our hands on an email that the Majority Leader Mitch McConnell sent out to every Republican senator that said that if they cannot get it together, if any Republicans decide to join Democrats and the result is a shutdown, then they will be here Saturday and Sunday. Neil? Incredible.
But the meantime, the betting is they're still going to go with this, whatever measure they can kick around tonight, right? And no guarantees at all. In fact, little that they'll get a yay in the Senate. Okay. I apologize for that. We apparently lost the connection. But I did leave him thinking. I know that. All right. In the meantime, Fox Business Network's Deidre Bolton on what happens if, well, the unthinkable happens. And for the first time in 5 years, they shut the puppy down.
That's right. We have a list for you, Neil, of what would be left open, what would close, and of course, just hearing from our colleague there, Peter, it seems like a 50-50 chance of a shutdown in mind. So I'm going to start with the list here. Potential impact of a government shutdown. So uniformed military personnel, Neil, all of these people to whom we owe our freedom, they would have to work for delayed pay, technically without pay. They will eventually be paid, but that's the Army, the Marines, the Navy, the Air Force, the Coast Guard, and a few other government bodies, some of whom help us watch for hurricanes, other sort of essential roles, if you like, essentially work without pay. We heard President Trump telling reporters outside of the Pentagon, just very briefly, that, yes, the shutdown could happen. Of course, he was there earlier getting ready to speak with senior officials. We have been speaking so much this year about tax reform. If you were expecting a big rebate from 2017, your payment could be delayed. That is one thing that will happen as well if the shutdown happens. If you're planning a family vacation, some national parks and national museums would be closed when you went. So Smithsonian in D.C., Holocaust Memorial Museum in D.C. It is a very, very long list as for parks parks, national parks, that would be shuttered, at least temporarily. Now, on the brighter side, your mail would still be delivered. So that's the good news. You can still send and receive. You should have a normal service. Citizens who need unemployment benefits or food stamps, they would still receive those benefits. Also, Social Security and Medicare benefits, those would be paid out as well. So again, another bright spot for people who need those services. As for travelers, either work or pleasure, there would be enough air traffic controllers on the job. Obviously important when you think about getting on an airplane. You want to make sure that that is properly staffed. The FAA is properly staffed. So those are some of the bright spots, but obviously the brightest one would be avoiding a shutdown altogether. So fingers crossed, Neil. Back to you.
Yeah, to avoid this entire debate. Florida Republican Congressman Matt Gaetz is with us right now. Congressman, thanks for taking the time. How likely does it look to you that a shutdown is going to happen?
Well, Congress budgets a lot like a 17-year-old does a term paper, Neil. We wait until the last minute and then do a pretty mediocre job of it. I think the odds could be 50-50. I would say that it's disappointing to me that 1 year into Republican control of the Congress, we have yet to do anything to cut spending. And at the same time, members of our military who are downrange, who need training and equipment and munitions, aren't getting what they need as a consequence of this CR. Every time the public hears continuing resolution, they should think more of the same. More depriving our military of what they need, more funding of Planned Parenthood, more funding of Obamacare exchanges. Those are the types of things that Republicans promise to be against, and that's why we're fighting for real reform, not just kicking the can down the road.
All right, so what would that mean on this measure that could come up tonight?
More funding for our troops. Conservatives have said to our leadership that if we can fully fund military and do a continuing resolution on all the other domestic priorities, we would hold our nose and vote for it, because there is no excuse for sending my constituents downrange into harm's way without the training and munitions that they need. Over 80 training deaths just in this last calendar year alone, Neil, in our military, and we are complicit in those deaths if we do not fund the military adequately. That's what conservatives are fighting for.
But this tentative measure, I'm told, sir, whether it's 5 days or 30 days, doesn't guarantee that.
Well, that's why we're fighting for a better measure. One of the reasons why a number of conservatives have not indicated that they're willing to support this vote at 7 o'clock tonight is that we want to see a commitment for our troops, for our military, and the training equipment that they need. We promised that to our voters. We said we would rebuild the military. We're now over a year into the work of the 115th Congress, and we have failed to maintain that commitment, and several of us want to see that it is met.
Do you think that the Democrats are setting you up, though, fully predicting this and taking away whatever wind has been at your back from the surprisingly strong response to those tax cuts?
Well, Democrats want to shut the government down over DACA, for goodness sakes. Neil, this last election wasn't about DACA.
You want to shut the government down over this, right?
No, look, if the Democrats would come on board with the existing continuing resolution, I don't know that the leadership would even need the vote of conservatives. The reason Democrats are holding their vote, and don't take my word for it, it's what they say, they're holding their vote because they want a DACA fix. If this last election was about DACA, Hillary Clinton would have won it. This last election was about border security, and look, another way that a lot of conservatives would vote for this continuing resolution would be the implementation of border security measures like the legislation put together by Judiciary Chairman Bob Goodlatte and Raul Labrador. If that legislation came to the floor, they'd have all the votes they needed for this continuing resolution.
All right, we'll watch closely. Congressman, thank you very, very much. We're going to get the read, by the way, from Senator Rand Paul, who's not keen on this the way it stands right now. He's coming up late in the broadcast. By the way, the Dow disrupted its rally from yesterday by selling.
We can keep it like this, we're going to win a lot of elections, that I can tell you. It's something. No, it's something. It's the economy, stupid. Did you ever hear that one? It's the economy. It is indeed.
All right, the president choosing a Pennsylvania venue to crow about tax cuts that are sort of like the gift that keeps giving, even beyond some of his wildest expectations. Signs now that Apple is crediting the tax cut for what will be a big investment in this country. Tens of billions of dollars, or $350 billion, we're told, over 10 years, and an upfront payment to the United States Treasury of $35 billion in taxes, as it brings home a lot of that loot abroad. Democratic strategist Kritzy Seltzer, along with market watchers Gary Kelpom and Melissa Armo. Melissa, what do you think? He is saying that this is the trend that's the friend, and that it's going to be remembered as happening under a Republican watch, you say?
Well, thanks for having me, Neil. Here's the thing. People forget that it's not just the fact that the market is bullish. The market is doing something very unique. In fact, for our viewers, the market has never, ever before power trended up. There's a difference between a rally and a bullish market and a power trend. And let me give you an example of what I mean. In 8 trading days, the Dow hit over 25,000 and then went over 26,000. That, my friends, is a power trend. And it's a little bit hard to...
Well, it could also be called a melt-up. Some people worry about that. And it's always your position where you look at it. But, Gary, what the president is saying is that unlike an AP story that seems to conclude this is all on Barack Obama, my immediate impression was, why can't we credit both? I mean, the bull market began 9 years ago after a couple of months of Barack Obama. It continues right now under Donald Trump. Why can't they each take a bow?
Under Obama, the market was very strong for 8 years. I give him the credit. I don't give him much credit on the economy. For me, it was subpar. And I must tell you that the left basically blamed George Bush's recession on subpar. Now they try to take credit. For me, it's very simple. We have changed the structure of how government looks at business starting when Trump became president. And it's not just the numbers you hear. It's what you're hearing from people and how they feel. And you're seeing it. And this Apple thing was the cherry on top of the whipped cream on top of the cake. And I can promise you we're going to now see a domino effect. It's not just going to be Apple. I think you're going to see probably 2,000, 3,000 more companies over the next year or two doing the same thing.
Christy, that could obviously keep a market rally going, but that could go a long way to keep, an economic recovery going. What do you think?
I hope that it does. As your other panelists have noted, we had 8 strong years of stock market and economy under President Obama. That has continued somewhat under President Trump. But we actually saw in 2017.
More than somewhat, right?
No. In 2017, we actually saw fewer jobs created than we had in the 5 previous years, right? All of which were obviously under President Obama. So I'm not discounting. There has been job growth. There's been a positive economy. Look, I'm happy to see the stock market doing well, but I think it's necessary to take some, precautions as well, which is that
we could be looking at 3% plus growth. I mean, for an entire year, that wouldn't be too shabby, right?
It would not be too shabby. Again, the problem is that President Trump wants to say, unlike past presidents that would credit the American people or business or, the economy is complex. President Trump likes to say, I alone can fix it. I alone did this.
That is not true. Chrissy, I love you dearly, but I do
Obama never said that. He never said
Guys,
I alone.
Wait.
No, Obama said we didn't build it. Remember he said you didn't build it?
I beg you to stop.
Okay.
I want to quote Barack Obama by Barack Obama quoting Barack Obama a short time ago. Look at this.
Yes.
We saw the U.S. economy grow consistently. We saw the longest streak of job creation in American history by far. A streak that still continues, by the way. Thanks, Obama.
Okay, so that was last month. But you know what I'm saying. Melissa, I always think with this stuff, we blame presidents when the economy tanks. We might as well give them about when it goes their way. You might credit the Federal Reserve. You might credit other factors. I think both President Trump and President Obama can take a bow out of this. And who's to begrudge just making money? What do you say, Melissa?
Well, here, I'm going to say something to make everybody here happy today. The thing is that no one president actually can take credit for the growth of the economy. It's the policies that any president puts in place that can take growth for the economy.
And the Federal Reserve. Right.
That's right. So it's business owners, like small business owners like me, big businesses like Fox, all of those people, working people, we are the ones that move the economy, people that buy goods and services. So the fact
Not according to Donald Trump, right? Again, when the unemployment rate, when it was, under 5% under President Obama, that was a fake rate. It was obviously a fiction. Now that it's also, 4.5%, now under him, it's very, very real.
But you can't be the market rally.
You're the market watch who tries not to be red or blue about this. A lot of people are making a lot of money over the last 9 years of this bull market. Do you see it continuing?
I think right now, yes. And as I've said for a long time, the biggest worry longer term is this massive debt that continues to grow. That is
keeping up with the spending drama on Capitol Hill. And will we see the government go out of business technically late Friday night or not? We are expecting the House to vote on an interim spending measure to prevent that from happening. It's very, very dicey in the United States Senate, where we're told, and Democrats are already crowing about the reality that the votes simply are not there. And it's not only the number of no votes on their side, but the number of no votes on the Republican side, including this prominent one, Kentucky Republican Senator Rand Paul. Senator, good to have you.
Thanks, Neil.
So you're a no on this. Why?
Well, I think government spends too much money. Our debt this year, our deficit this year will be close to $800 billion. Next year is projected to be $1 trillion. So for decades now, you've heard of Congress putting spending caps in place, self-imposed rules to try to get spending under control. Well, this spending bill will exceed those caps. One of the caps were called pay-go caps, and we put them in place a dozen years ago. And I think we've exceeded them, 700 times, 29 times in the last couple of years. So really, we ought, if we say we're fiscally conservative, we ought to be fiscally conservative. So I'm just not voting to exceed the spending caps, and I'm not voting for $700 billion deficits annually.
All right, so whatever the House measure ultimately proves to be, they're working on one, I'm told that would be for as few as 5 days. You just don't like the back and forth on it.
Well, it's a terrible way to run your government. They call it continuing resolutions,
right.
And to me that means continuing an abdication of our duty to actually spend the money department by department. So we have 12 different departments of government. They have appropriation bills. We've done that 4 times in 40 years. It's fiscally irresponsible to glom them all together and say, oh, my hair's on fire. There's a deadline. We have to just vote for it. So examples of waste that I point to, and I'll give you one real quickly. Neil Armstrong, they spent $700,000 trying to determine whether he said one small step for man or one small step for a man. $700,000 spent on that ridiculous idea of research. That stuff goes on year after year after year. It never goes away because no one takes the time to specifically look at the money spent. It's glommed together in trillion-dollar bills, and frankly, I've had enough of it, and I think the American people have had enough with it, and that means that we got to close the place down and restart it under better management. I'm all for that.
Do we know what it was with Neil Armstrong, by the way, for that $700,000? A man.
You know what their conclusion was, Neil? They still don't know.
Yeah.
Inquiring minds want to know. They still don't know. And you know what makes it even worse? They took the money from autism research. So every person with a child with autism in America ought to be pissed off at their government that they spent it trying to figure out what Neil Armstrong said on the moon. What an insult.
Where do you think this is going? Because Republicans, as you know, being the party that has a run of the table in Washington, they're going to get fingered. You will get fingered for this. What do you think?
I'm concerned about doing what's right, not about which party wins this, because, frankly, this particular time I'll vote with more Democrats. Yesterday, I voted with more Democrats to try to protect American privacy from intelligence agencies snooping in your phone calls. I don't care which party presents it. Frankly, I am who I am. I said who I was. I'm not for debt. I'm not for higher taxes. I'm for smaller government. I'm for more American privacy. And I'm just going to vote whichever way that falls. But it really isn't, for me, a partisan issue.
What do you think of the way the president is trying to handle this and his role in that some have said he gave mixed signals, for example, on the child health credit thing, but that should be maybe a separate measure, that he's confusing them. What do you say?
All of these things should be separate measures. There's 12 different departments of government. We should pass them one at a time. There should be a defense appropriation. There should be a childhood health, a CHIPS program appropriation or a Medicaid appropriation. They all should be separate, and we should look at them. We should look at the food stamp program and find out, is it going for food? Is a soft drink food? I mean, there's all kinds of things we should look at in our spending, but it's all glommed together in one bill that no one could possibly conceive of $1 trillion and how we're spending it. It's all in one bill. There will be no reform. It's a terrible, rotten, no good way to run your government, and I want no part of it. And I wish there were more people standing up. And I think there are people at home shaking their heads saying, we spent $700,000 trying to find out what Neil Armstrong said on the moon 35 years ago. That's the kind of craziness that's going on in government. I can give you 20 more examples. How many more minutes do I have?
Yeah. Let me get your take on the dust-up, earlier about the president, his doctor, and everything else, and whether the pressure of the job that people were asking press conference whether he's, you know, even up to the job and whether he's snapping or he's mentally not up to it. What do you think of that back and forth?
You know, it's I think a low day and a bad day for the media to, you know, kibitz about what the president's weight is. Is he really 6'3" or maybe he's 6'2"? I mean, how ridiculous are people? And the thing is that we could have meaningful debates in our country, and everybody's like criticizing this and that, and it's like we had a debate over the Fourth Amendment from the Bill of Rights. Going all the way back to John Adams and James Otis, we had an important debate, and people were wondering about the president's weight. And did he take a menses test? Did he, you know, is he a genius? You know, all of this ridiculous tabloid trash. We had a meaningful debate over the Bill of Rights, and very few of America noticed it because you got networks that were so obsessed with his weight and his height.
Your take on where this whole battle is going, because it is blurring the positive developments of the tax cut and companies that seem to be delivering the goods beyond just rewarding their shareholders, Apple the latest. You know, are you surprised by all of that?
I think there's an amazing story here, and no matter how bad the media is at covering it, a lot of people are going to get increases in their checks. 2 million people now have had an increase in their take-home pay because of the tax cut that Republicans passed. I think it's going to be hard to hide it. I think some in the media who want to help the Democrats, they don't want to talk about the tax cut. 2 million people getting more in their paycheck. People's wages going from a starting wage at Walmart from 9 to 11. Many companies going to $15 an hour. Hundreds of thousands of workers with bonuses. Apple bringing home $350 billion. Talking about 20,000 new jobs with Apple. Paying $38 billion in taxes. I mean, there are so many good stories out here, but we are somewhat distracted talking about other things other than policy. But I think you can't, the people who work and look at their pay stub will not be able to escape that they're going to get more money.
Senator Rand Paul, thank you. Very good seeing you again.
Thanks, Neil.
All right, Republican Chris Christie, he is now a memory in New Jersey. Enter Phil Murphy, the Democrat, who says that he wants to hike taxes on the rich. I want you to meet a prominent Democrat in the state who says, you know, Governor, be
A stronger and fairer New Jersey ensures that the wealthiest among us pay their fair share in taxes, so working and middle-class families can keep more of their hard-earned money.
All right, it is no longer Governor Chris Christie. The guy running New Jersey now is named Phil Murphy, and that was from his State of the State address, his inaugural address, in which he promised, yeah, we're going to try to balance this out, and I think telegraph a tax on millionaires. New Jersey Democratic Senate President Stephen Sweeney with us right now. Mr. Senate President, very good to have you.
Thanks for having me, Neil.
Did I get that right? Is he advocating what he advocated on the stump, a millionaire's tax?
Well, he's talking about that right now, but ever since things happened in Washington, you know, I basically put a pause on moving forward right now with the millionaire's tax. It's something I actually voted for several times, but Neil, things have to change in New Jersey, and I mean they have to change in a big way. So I've just put a group of economists together and tax experts, and we're going to look at everything, and we pretty much have to blow the system up and start over.
Have you bounced this off the governor?
You know, the governor is aware of my position right now, Neil, because you know, what happened in Washington created a real heartache for the state of New Jersey as a New Jersey, and you know that. And
you're talking about
that
you could
need
no longer
to
deduct
refocus
state
on
and
what
local
we're
taxes,
doing.
right?
Yeah, you know, you're talking about a major increase in taxes on the wealthy community, and this is a community that 1%, you know, 1% of the people in New Jersey pay 42% of its tax base, income tax base. So we got to be very careful with it. And I've basically said let's look at everything now. You know, I'm a half glass full guy at times, and I'm looking at, you know, we can do things, progressive things, but we also have to be very careful and make sure that we don't chase people out of here.
You know, I heard you the last time we were chatting about this very issue, Senator, and the one thing I think I heard from the governor-elect when he was first elected and in his inaugural address is he's full steam ahead with this. What do you think?
Well, listen, I respect his position, and he has a right to do or say whatever he feels. It's just that as a Senate President, I have a responsibility too, and we're going to, we're taking a real look at this, Neil. This is something that right after my election I said we were moving full steam ahead with. And then I said, well, wait a minute. I never dreamed what was going to happen in Washington happened. And now we have to look at how we fund our schools and how we tax. Neil, there's plenty of money in the state of New Jersey going into taxes. We're just not spending it right.
To your colleagues, you influence a lot of votes, Senator, and as president, you're a mover and shaker there. You did a lot of things with Chris Christie. You also challenged Chris Christie when events warranted. Talk about a fair and balanced leader. Kudos to you. So do you know whether others share your fear in your party that would be a mistake to pursue a surtax on millionaires, whatever you want to call it, would be the way to go?
Well, there's other members like me that are concerned, and they want to have a full picture before you move forward doing new taxes, Neil. You know, the more you tax, the more people leave, and people have the ability to leave. So we got to be careful with it. Listen, I was one of the people that said let's move full steam ahead into what happened in Washington. Now I'm really of the belief that we need to look at the way we tax in New Jersey, entirely the way we tax in New Jersey, and fix it. And, you know, putting economists and tax experts together, you know, to look at everything and say, hey, listen, this system doesn't work anymore. $8,500 per average homeowner, property taxes in the state, just it's a time to correct the problems. And I'm going to take advantage of a crisis to try to fix some of the problems we have in the state of New Jersey.
Now, some interpreted from the governor's remarks as well as an inaugural address, Senator, is that he wants to make New Jersey a sanctuary state, very similar to what Governor Brown did in California. How do you feel about that?
Listen, I think we have to have a discussion about what we do when we come to the sanctuary state. You know, I support cities that make those decisions, you know, and they have a right to make those decisions. Individual cities make those decisions, and I think that system's worked up to this point, and you know, we're not trying to take any rights from any communities that want to be sanctuary communities, but you also have to talk about communities that will now be forced upon that maybe might choose not to. So, again, that's another conversation that we need to have.
All right, the reason why I mention is that there's confusion about if ICE is trying to look for people, and it's getting harder in California to do that because they might be shielded there. Are you worried about the same thing that could happen in New Jersey, whatever happens in communities like Newark or elsewhere, that if this is a statewide policy, there's going to be heads butting between local officials, state officials, and ICE agents?
Well, that's why, you know, a decision like this really requires everybody in the room, from mayors to county officials to legislators, to make this type of decision. You know, there's a great concern, but there's also an idea about fairness too, Neil. You know, I'm concerned about some of these young kids, these dreamers that are being, you know, sent, or they're talking about sending them home. We're having problems in our courts now because the ICE agents are showing up at court hearings and they're arresting people, so people aren't going to their hearings now. So again, you know, before we just run out and do something, we really need to have a full-blown discussion on how we're going to proceed forward.
You know, Senator, Chris Christie in his final address singled you out as among those he had a productive relationship with, and you obviously work closely on a number of key issues, showing cooperation is possible. We live in a very, very polarized environment now. Maybe it's a little easier given the fact that Democrats run the table in New Jersey, but are you concerned that it's still going to be tough, that there'll be elements in your party, the hard left, that's going to make it very difficult to even compromise with the moderate?
Well, we have to find compromise. You know, the most important thing to do in elected office is to compromise. I mean, I know how I feel on a lot of issues, and I've compromised a great deal with Chris Christie over the years. And when things I believed in, things I didn't believe, we fought. The same with him. And the Democrats are no different. You know, there's different branches of the Democrat, you know, party. And we're going to all have to come to an understanding that we have to compromise if we're going to get things done. You know, we don't want to be a repeat of Washington where you have, you know, the struggles that you have. We don't want to be an embarrassment. We want to work together. The progressive values that we believe in, you know, I believe in raising the minimum wage. It's just, how do we raise the minimum wage? How responsible do we do it? You know, paid sick leave is a bill that I did. But again, it's the detail. It's the devil's in the detail. So we can do progressive things, but it's New Jersey's a moderate state. I tell people this over and over again. We are not a liberal state. We are a moderate state. That's why out of the last 40 years, 24 of them we had Republican governors. So we have to remember that most of the people are in the middle of this state, and we're going to work on progressive values, but we're also going to remember that 80% of us are right in the middle.
Yeah, well, you're right about that. Mr. Senate President Steve Sweeney, very good seeing you again. Happy New Year.
You too, Neil. Thank you.
All right, watch it very, very closely. He will be very instrumental in the changes that are going on in the Garden State. All right, in the meantime, you want to know just how bad the flu season is getting? Take a look. You're not imagining this flu is one of the worst we've seen. We're told in decades. Young people dying, people otherwise you wouldn't expect would be ending up in the hospital are in the hospital, and they can't seem to get a handle on it. To West End Medical Group surgeon Dr. Kelly Powers. Doctor, thanks for taking the time. Why is this particular strain, or at least maybe it's not just one strain, doctor, so virulent?
That's right. Good to be back, Neil. Thanks for having me on. Public health authorities are saying it's the most widespread outbreak in over a dozen years. And you're absolutely right. This one is much more virulent, the virus, the strain. The mutation is actually called the H3N2. And although the flu vaccine, and we're all encouraged to get it, sometimes it's based on a prediction, and sometimes we don't always get it right. So WHO, CDC, they meet, they try to predict based on research and trends what was happening in the southern hemisphere prior to this flu season, and they predict what virus might affect us. So the H3N2 is actually very virulent and unfortunately not that effective with the virus. CDC actually said initially that it was 40 to 60% efficacy. Then they changed that to about 30% efficacy, and in recent studies are saying even maybe 15% or less. So
what do you do? What do you tell your patients then? Let's say talk about those who have it and those who are afraid they'll get it.
Yeah, well, you're not only a patient, but myself, if I don't start coughing in this segment, because I actually did have the vaccine and I ended up with the flu as well. Yeah, so prevention, the common sense stuff, the washing the hands, the vitamin C, the sleeping, keeping your immunity up, all that stuff is great. But, at the end of the day, the CDC is still recommending that we get the vaccine because it is the best first-line defense that we have, regardless if it's 30 to 15%, especially for the very young, the very old, and the immunocompromised. Immunocompromised being anybody who has a transplant, who is on chemotherapy, cancer patients, and such.
What is happening to all these healthy people, though, doctor, who are ending up in the hospital, and some, including young, otherwise very healthy people, one an athlete, die?
Yeah, it is a little bit perturbing. It's definitely confusing. As a medical professional, I don't have their medical records. I didn't examine them. I don't know exactly what their past medical history is. So a lot of times, though, I'm reading in some of these articles that are coming out. I know there was recently a little boy in Connecticut who died at 10 years old from the flu, but when looking at the research a little more in the article, basically the flu had turned into pneumonia, which then he ended up with sepsis. So it wasn't the flu that had caused the fatality, but rather a secondary effect.
Now, weather and all that, we've had extreme cold and then just a warm up, and we're going to deal with that again. How much does that enter into things, and what do people have to do?
Yeah, it could be related to the cold itself, the weather. I know we've all had this Arctic blast, but again, it happens. It's just we're unfortunate that this influenza B H3N2 virus is really virulent, and unfortunately, the vaccine is just not that effective this season.
All right. Well, doctor, thank you. Very handy advice. But all those people got the flu shot and saying, hey, what the heck?
Including me.
Exactly. Right, doctor. Thank you very, very much.
Thanks for having me on, Neil.
All right. In the meantime, it's looking like the government wants to try very, very hard to avoid a shutdown. But not everyone's on the same page. And because of that, it's looking increasingly likely we will.